a true democracy in talk radio. Of, for, and by you, the people.
Live from our nation's capital, it's Deadline DC with Brad Bannon.
Hi, I'm Brad Bannon, the host of Deadline DC. I'm a national Democratic strategist, a columnist for The Hill in Washington, D.C., and a political analyst for news radio stations KNX in Los Angeles and WGN in Chicago. My company, Bannon Communications Research, polls for progressive issue groups, labor unions, and Democrats. BannonCR.com is the sponsor of today's show. If you want to learn more about my political polling firm, or if you have any ideas or suggestions for Deadline DC, the best way to reach me is on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @BradBannon, all one word. Today we have a great show for you. In the first half hour, our guest is Shawn, the editor of Congressional Quarterly magazine, who brief us on activity in Congress. Then in the second half hour, we will have, as usual, the provocative progressive political panel. Today on the panel, my guests are Devlin, the host of TARABUSTER, and our own executive producer, Mark Grimaldi. But first, we have a clip to play you on the infrastructure battle in the United States Senate.
But there are a lot of Republicans, probably every Republican, who says there's no way we're going to support this first bipartisan bill if it is any way linked and connected to this much bigger, basically, freight train heading towards socialism.
So Lindsey Graham said he's out. He's no longer voting yes. Are you no longer voting yes? Do we have a deal, or do we not have a deal?
Well, I've talked to a number of members of the bipartisan group. They are all reluctant now to move forward. They're going to need more assurances from the president that there is no link, no connection between the bipartisan bill and this bill that the Democrats want to do. Really, they may end up trying to use, and I believe they will try to use, reconciliation on this $6 trillion bill. But that's going to be a high wire act for them with no safety net. There's not going to be a single Republican in the House or Senate who's going to vote for it. They're going to be left to try to get every Democrat in the Senate. They'll need every one, and they can only afford to lose 4 in the House.
That was Senator John Barrasso, a Republican, talking about the freight train to socialism. Boy, that sounds scary. Anyway, our guest in this half hour is an expert on Capitol Hill. Shawn is the editor of Congressional Quarterly magazine. His other claim to fame is that he was the first guest on Deadline DC, and hopefully he will not be the last. Shawn, welcome back to Deadline DC.
It's great to be on, Brad. Thanks for having me.
Okay, let's start with infrastructure. We just heard Senator John Barrasso, a Republican from Maine, discussing last week a group of Republican and Democratic senators agreed to a bipartisan infrastructure package, which I think comes in at about $1 trillion. Last week, President Biden announced that agreement was predicated on passing a larger Democratic-only reconciliation package. Then he kind of backed away from that, saying it might or might not. Can you clarify the situation for us, Shawn?
Well, it is confusing. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts here. It is truly a game of chess that's going on, and the outcome is unknown at this point. I think what happened last week is this bipartisan group, indeed, they reached a deal with President Biden to spend about $1 trillion on infrastructure over the next 5 years. About 580 million of it would be new funding above what's currently planned. And it's got, it had at one point 11 Republicans on it, and there were 5 Democrats negotiating. The Democrats negotiating are the moderate types, Joe Manchin of West Virginia, Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona. And so the idea here for the Republicans is to take the wind out of the Democrats' sails, to give them a win, a bipartisan win, to give Biden money to spend on infrastructure. And then their hope is that the larger Biden plan, which would include funding for childcare, funding for elder care, free college, community college tuition, they hope all that will fall apart after they reach this bipartisan agreement, that there just won't be an appetite among Democrat moderates to move forward. Democratic progressives are worried about that. And so they said, hey, you can't pass this bipartisan bill without our support. It just can't get through the Senate without it. It can't get through the House without it. And so they said, we need these 2 bills to be linked, to move together as one, because we don't trust that both will pass if you move the bipartisan infrastructure bill first. And so you saw the Democratic leaders, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, repeating that argument as a way to reassure the progressives in their caucuses. And you saw President Joe Biden restate that point in his press conference. But then the Republicans got cold feet, and they said, hey, wait a second, you know, that takes away our hope, which is that your larger plan falls apart. And so they said, we may back out. And so now things are in flux. You know, Biden said one thing, now he's saying another thing. And it's going to get real interesting this coming month.
Now, could you briefly explain what is in the bipartisan agreement? It seemed to me, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, it was basically hardcore infrastructure, bridges, roads. What exactly is in the bipartisan package?
Yeah, the Republicans are willing to spend money on roads, bridges, the hard infrastructure stuff, ports. In addition to that, broadband has bipartisan support, so expansion of broadband in rural areas, that's in the bill. The problem they had in reaching it that they had to overcome was how to pay for it. The Republicans wanted to raise the gas tax, or at least link it to inflation, so it would rise with inflation. They wanted to hit drivers of electric vehicles, which obviously they don't pay the gas tax. It would hit them with sort of a mileage-driven fee or some sort of fee so that they would be contributing. And they wanted to repurpose funds from that $2 trillion coronavirus relief bill that Congress enacted in March with only Democratic votes. And so Biden said, no, we're not going to do that. That would violate my pledge to not raise taxes on people under 400,000. I don't want to touch the COVID relief money. And so they had to work out quite a deal there where they're going to task the IRS with going after unpaid tax bills, doing more audits. They're going to, you know, find out other creative accounting mechanisms to say that the bill is paid for. And they would reuse some COVID relief money, but it would be from the bills that passed last year, not this year.
Okay. Now, what is not in the bipartisan package that the progressives want? I think the president was talking, as you mentioned, the $5 trillion package. What is in the progressive package that's not in the bipartisan package?
Mainly the stuff in what's known as the Biden's American Families Plan. So that is money to help people pay for the care of their elderly parents. It's money to pay for child care. It's money, free community college tuition for Americans who, for the 2 years that you would go to community college. It's also a lot of climate money. So there is some climate money in the bipartisan bill, but not nearly as much as a lot of Democrats want to see. And so things, for example, like those electric vehicle charging stations, Biden wants to expand those all over the country. And so that's not in the bipartisan bill.
Okay. We're going to go to break now for our radio listeners, but we're going to stay right here for our television viewers. Our guest in this half hour is Shawn Zeller, who is the editor of Congressional Quarterly magazine, and Shawn is trying to help us hack our way through the congressional swamp in Washington, D.C. So stay tuned. We'll have more of Shawn Zeller and more of Deadline DC after we come back from break. That'll be a couple minutes for our radio listeners and almost right away for our television viewers. So hang in there.
I want to get back to seeing my grandbabies every Sunday and smothering them with
Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. I'm Brad Bannon. Our guest in this half hour is Shawn Zeller, who is the editor of Congressional Quarterly magazine. Shawn is an expert on Capitol Hill, and he's trying to help us sort through the ins and outs of the infrastructure, battle over infrastructure that's going on in Congress. Shawn, yesterday I saw Joe Manchin, the Senator, moderate Democrat from West Virginia. He was on, I think it was ABC, talking about infrastructure. And he said basically that he could support, I guess, in addition to the bipartisan package, another $2 trillion package that would pass by Democrats only through a process called reconciliation. And he said that he favors the $2 trillion figure because that's what we could pay for by essentially hiking corporate taxes. Can you explain to our viewers what reconciliation and how that would work?
Sure, I'll try to be brief. Reconciliation is a process Congress can do typically once a year. There are some exceptions apparently, but it's been used at most once a year. It's really only valuable when Congress and the president are controlled by the same party, as is the case right now. And it allows passage of a bill on a party line vote. You only need a simple majority. So in other words, you can't filibuster it in the Senate. There's no 60 vote requirement. So currently it will take 50 votes plus Kamala Harris to get it through the Senate. There are limitations, however, on what can be included in the bill. It has to be fiscal related. It has to be budget related. It can't be a policy bill. For example, the For the People Act, the voting bill, the elections bill that went down to a filibuster last week would not be able to go into a reconciliation bill because it's not fiscal related, it's not budget related. So this is the Democrats used the reconciliation process to get that big COVID relief bill in March, $2 trillion, and they want to use it again for fiscal 2021, and that would start October 1st. They could pass this bill with additional spending programs for those items we talked about earlier, childcare, elder care, community college. Those could all fit into this legislation.
Okay. We're going to bring back our radio listeners. Our guest in this segment is Shawn Zeller, editor of Congressional Quarterly magazine, and he's giving us a status update on the events in the United States Senate affecting some very big issues where you talked about infrastructure. We're also going to try to talk about a couple other bills that are pending in the Senate. So don't go anywhere. We'll be back with more of Deadline DC with Brad Bannon and our guest, Shawn Zeller, the editor of CQ magazine, when we get back from this break.
Unconstitutional.
Welcome back to Deadline DC. I'm Brad Bannon, and our guest in this segment is Shawn Zeller, the editor of Congressional Quarterly magazine. Shawn, let's go back to the infrastructure bill, since that seems to be the main order of business in Capitol Hill these days. Now, the way it seems to me, this is the way things stand. Last week, there was an agreement between the president and a bipartisan group of senators on a $1 trillion infrastructure package, which basically is just straight building bridges and roads and broadband, I guess. The Joe Manchin, the moderately conservative Democratic senator from West Virginia, said yesterday he would support a $2 trillion package that would be funded by increases in corporate taxes. The president had initially proposed a $5 trillion package, and a group of progressives, including Bernie Sanders of Vermont, favors a $6 trillion package. So we've got quite a spread there. And it seemed to me, when I was watching Joe Manchin yesterday, I was trying to think if his statement was good or bad news for the Biden administration. The good news is he sort of hinted that he may support reconciliation, and they need his vote in the Senate for reconciliation to work. But it's, the $2 trillion package he's talking about is well short of what the president wants and the progressives want. So I guess one question I have, let's say we finally settled on a $2 trillion package through reconciliation, which leaves out a lot of the things that the president and progressives want. Would they be able? Would that package get progressive support from senators like Bernie Sanders, and I guess another one would be Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts? What are the prospects for that?
Well, progressives have been trying to lay down some red lines where they say they need to go in order to get their votes. And one of those is significant funding to combat climate change. So I think if that $2 trillion bill includes significant funding to combat climate change, that's helpful in terms of getting the progressive vote. Now, if one of the other big pieces gets left on the side, money for childcare, money for elder care, money for education, the progressives have not said that that's a red line for them yet. So it remains to be seen whether some might say, I can't support it unless it does this. I think at the end of the day, and you've heard this from Bernie Sanders, who's the Senate budget chairman. He's put out a very, as you said, $6 trillion proposal. But I think he's also recognized that it's likely to come down some. And so if at the end of the day, the Democrats get $3 trillion, whereas Biden initially proposed $4 trillion, my thinking will be there will be a lot of celebration about that.
Yeah, I would think so. Let's talk about another piece of legislation. Last week, I heard Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina saying that he and Democratic Cory Booker were moving closer on a police reform bill. And if they do get together, what might that legislation look like?
Well, the areas on which they agree are to restrain the use of force more than it is currently restrained in law. They agree, for example, to make it more difficult to use holds that restrict people's breathing. How George Floyd died and others have died at the hands of police. They agree about things like spending more money on body cameras, on better police training. Where the big hangup has been over the civil liability of individual officers. This is called qualified immunity. Under current law, you can't sue an individual police officer. Now, you can get compensated if you're a victim of police brutality by the employer of the police officer, the city or the town that employs them. Cities and towns pay out a lot of money. But progressives want the civil liability change so that there's a deterrent for an individual officer to think twice when they're engaging a suspect. And so we still don't know what deal they have worked there. There's been talk about making it easier to sue departments instead of individual officers, but we haven't seen the details. And so we're sort of in the same place we've been for a while, where they're saying they're making progress, but we haven't seen the details.
If and again, as you explained before, since this is a policy matter and not a fiscal matter, that they can't go to reconciliation. So that would need 60 votes to survive a filibuster from opponents. Do you think they can come up with a package that will have some kind of immunity, limitation on police immunity that could survive the filibuster override?
Yeah, I think if Tim Scott, the Republican senator from South Carolina, comes out and says, I back this compromise, I support it, that you're going to get to 60 votes, because I just don't see his Republican colleagues contradicting Tim Scott. He's the lone black Republican in the Senate, one of the few black Republicans in the Congress. He's been the victim of police malfeasance himself. And so if you get his endorsement, I think, yes, you get it. The question is, is the compromise then something that progressives think is too weak?
Okay. One other thing, is there any likelihood for Senate action on political reform? The Republicans filibustered the passage of the For the People Act, which contains significant political reforms. That looks like it's dead. Is there anything short of that it is likely to get out of the Senate?
It's going to be real tough. Joe Manchin, who says, who wanted big changes to that bill, and they got his vote to move to debate, but he still wasn't supportive of the underlying bill. He says he wants to make Voting Rights Act reforms instead of the For the People Act now, but there's still not a lot of Republican support for that. Lisa Murkowski, the Republican senator from Alaska, is on board, but I don't think they got 10 votes. So you'd have to see a whole reframing of this issue, I think, for it to have any prospect of moving forward, or you'd have to see Democrats unite behind getting rid of the filibuster, which to this point doesn't seem plausible.
Okay. Shawn, thank you very much for joining us today on Deadline DC. I'm sure there's going to be lots to talk about on Capitol Hill after they get back from summer break. So we hope you can join us again. Our guest in this half hour was Shawn Zella, the editor of Congressional Quarterly Magazine. In the next half hour after the break, we're going back to the provocative progressive political panel. Today on the panel is Tara Devlin, the host of TARABUSTER, and our own executive producer, Mark Grimaldi. So make sure you stay through the break for that. You won't want to miss it. All sorts of strange stuff happens on the panel every week. And again, thank you, Shawn Zella. We'll be back after these messages.
Hey, Dad, how do airplanes fly? What's in this box? Can I touch this? Where does sand come from? Is this tree good for climbing? What happens if I mix these two things together?
Okay, Shawn, go on.
Baby's made. What does this thing do?
Kids are curious about everything, including guns. Talking to them about gun safety in your home is a good first step, but you can do more. Always keep your guns locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition. Storing your guns securely is the best way to prevent family fire, including unintentional shootings. For more information on safe gun storage and ways to keep your family safe, visit endfamilyfire.org. That's endfamilyfire.org.
What do we keep in the attic? What's this thing called? Can I ride my bike backwards?
Like I said, kids are curious. It's up to us to keep them safe. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady, and the Ad Council.
Right now, our country feels divided, but there's a place where people are coming together. I gotta tell you, I was nervous to talk to someone so different than me.
Me too, but I'm glad we are.
Love Has No Labels and One Small Step are helping people with different political views, beliefs, and life experiences come together through conversation, and it feels good.
Wow, your story is so...
Interesting?
Yeah.
When people actually sit down, talk, and listen to one another, they can break down boundaries and connect as human beings. At lovehasnolabels.com/onesmallstep, you can listen to amazing, life-changing conversations and find simple tools to start a conversation of your own.
I know one thing. This conversation gives me hope.
It gives me a lot of hope, too.
Take a step toward bringing our country and your community together by having the courage to start a conversation at lovehasnolabels.com/onesmallstep. A message from StoryCorps, Love Has No Labels, and the Ad Council.
Hey, you. Get away from those polling places. We don't want your kind here. Scram! That's a stupid, shameful, and ultimately self-defeating political message, yet it's being pushed as the official anti-voter electoral strategy of Republicans. Admitting that they can't get majorities to vote for their collection of corporate lackeys, conspiracy theorists, and bigoted old white guys, the GOP hierarchy's great hope is to shove as many Democratic voters as possible out of our elections. They're banking on a blitz of bureaucratic bills they're now trying to ram through nearly every state legislature to intimidate, divert, and otherwise deny eligible voters their most fundamental democratic right. Their main targets are people of color, but they're also pushing to keep students, senior citizens, union households, and poor communities from voting. Unable to come up with any actual need for these autocratic restraints, the GOP vote thieves are fraudulently exclaiming that millions of illegal immigrants, dead people, Chinese, and even pets are voting. These absurd claims have been thoroughly investigated, even by Republican judges, committees, media, etc., and repeatedly they've been proven to be, well, absurd. Let's be blunt. You're more likely to find Bigfoot than you are to find a case of mass vote fraud in America. Even some GOP politicos have quit pretending that they're searching for the big cheat, instead bluntly making an overt right-wing ideological argument for subverting democracy. Everybody shouldn't be voting, explained Representative John Kavanaugh, the Republican chair of Arizona's election committee. Slipping deeper into doctrinaire doo-doo, he asserts that it's not just the number of votes that should matter in an election. We have to look at the quality of the votes, too. This is Jim Hightower saying, I'm guessing that most Democratic voters would fall into his low-quality category.
Welcome back. For the provocative progressive political panel, but before that, we've got a clip to play from Senator Bernie Sanders talking about the need to invest heavily in America.
So what we have got to do is now invest in making sure that we have affordable housing in this country, that we have home health care for an aging population, that we're able to expand Medicare so that we finally can cover dental care and hearing aids and eyeglasses, that we deal with the crisis in child care where so many families, working families, cannot afford child care, and that in addition to all of that, it's absolutely imperative that we deal with the, I would say, existential threat to this planet of climate change. And when we do all that, when we invest in health care and in education, making higher education affordable, when we invest in transforming our energy system, we're going to create millions more good-paying jobs. So that's what the president wants, that's what I want, and I think that's what we're going to see.
That, of course, was Senator Bernie Sanders from Vermont talking about the need to invest in America. This half hour of Deadline DC is brought to you by my company, Bannon Communications Research, which polls for progressive issue groups, labor unions, and Democrats. America is sizzling and crumbling. The western United States is enveloped in a massive heat wave, and dozens of people may have died in a condo collapse in Florida. The bipartisan infrastructure infrastructure package that was agreed upon last week is nice, but it's not nearly enough to meet the urgent needs to rebuild America back better or to fight the ravages of climate change. You can read the rest of this column and all of my columns for The Hill at muckrack.com/Brad-Bannon. That's muckrack.com/Brad-Bannon. Now it's time for the provocative progressive political panel. Our guest panelist today is Tara Devlin. Tara is a New York City-based comedian and host of the unapologetically liberal podcast, TARABUSTER. Help keep real political media going and growing by becoming a patron of TARABUSTER at patreon.com/Tara Devlin. You can follow Tara on Twitter at Real Tara Devlin. That's it's RealTaraDevlin, and on Instagram at TARADACKTY. Also, that's always a mouthful for me.
I know. We don't have to do that anymore.
Joining
okay.
Tara on the panel is progressive political activist Mark Grimaldi. Mark has worked for several Democratic presidential candidates, including Joe Biden. Mark is also active in campaign finance reform and efforts to promote cancer research. His Twitter handle is Mark J. Grimaldi. That's MarkJGrimaldi. Okay, panel. Let's start with this. I've been in a real foul or sour mood about American politics lately. And, you know, Donald Trump is gone from the White House, thank God. But, you know, this nation is clearly divided. And so my opening question to the panel, and I don't know the answer to this, is how do the 81 million people who voted for Joe Biden coexist with the 73 million people that supported Donald Trump last November? You know, fortunately, more people voted for Joe Biden than Donald Trump, but there are still 73 million people out there who voted for Donald Trump. And even though he's out of the White House, the scars that he left in the United States aren't going away. And I'm tired of all the divisiveness. And Tara, how can we reconcile this bridge in American society? Can we?
Not when the Republican Party continues to spread the big lie and every other lie. So I almost don't. I feel bad for the Trumpanzees. You know, I know I shouldn't call them that, but hey, they make it too easy. But I feel bad in a way because they are being duped. They've been lied to. I'm sure there are people who actually believe it. Now, imagine if Joe Biden came out and he started saying, "This is stolen. This is rigged. This didn't really happen. This is a sham." We would believe him, right? So, for whatever reason, these right wingers, they believe this con man. I mean, Trump is a con man. So, the Democratic Party does a lot of work for the Republican Party it's almost like the Democrats have a vested interest, a larger vested interest in rehabilitating that party than the Republicans have themselves. They're still spreading the lie. They still on Fox News. I mean, I never thought I would see the Tucker Carlson segment where he called the general a stupid pig. I mean, these people are not kidding around, and there will be more violence if they're not stopped. Now, how do we do this? How can you find common ground with people who don't have an interest in finding common ground? And I'm of the belief that we have to be unapologetic We unapologetically have to put these people in their place, tell the American people what we're actually dealing with. But the Democrats, some of them clearly, like the Kristen Sinemas of the world, they're not doing that. They're giving it's like, on one hand, we're like, okay, the Republicans just incited an insurrection, and then the other hand, we're like, well, can we get bipartisan votes from them? Hello, there's some kind of cognitive dissonance here. And it's really, in my opinion, stems from the fact that we've never finished the job of Reconstruction. We barely got started back in the 1860s when it was compromise after compromise. And here where we have to all endure the 100 years of domestic terrorism that this country was put under. So we have to finish Reconstruction, but unapologetically so. And you can't do it with people who don't want to do it. It's like being in a relationship with somebody and they just simply will not, take responsibility for whatever it might be. How could you heal that? They're not taking responsibility for they can't even say what happened. They're rewriting the history of January 6th, just guaranteeing that it's going to happen again. They're not kidding. If we allow them to their success in undermining the next election, this is over. The grand experiment in liberal democracy is done. That's what we're up against. Period. End of sentence. Really. There's no other. There's no more important tasks. And yes, infrastructure is great. All of that is great. But we must save democracy. We have to heed the lessons of history. So I don't know what you guys think.
Mark, let me ask you the question a somewhat different way. Abraham Lincoln said that a house divided cannot survive.
Exactly.
And I actually, what the instance Tara brought up about Tucker Carlson is really what set me off last week. And that, that kind of talk from the right wing is epidemic. Can this country survive with these bitter political divisions?
I think that me personally, my heart wants to say yes, but my brain is referring to Tara's shirt. My brain is telling me, not at the current state. What's ironic to me is the bill you were talking about earlier with Shawn Zeller, the For the People Act, would do a lot of good because it would take a lot of the corporate money out of politics. It would also get people more involved with small donations. It would fix redistricting and gerrymandering, and it would ensure people's right to vote. So the fact that we have, we're talking about already having that bill being defeated by a filibuster that Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema refused to eliminate, which Tara was just talking about Reconstruction. The filibuster was a tool of the slavery era. It's deeply ironic to me. I'll have to finish after the break, Brad, because I know we're coming up to that.
Okay, we're going to go to break now for our radio listeners, but if you're watching us, stay tuned because we don't have a break. We have a very short one. So we'll be back with more of Deadline DC and the provocative progressive political panel with Tara Devlin and Mark Grimaldi right after this break.
What I know about courage, I learned from my adoptive mom.
I always
she said
we can talk now, right? Too? Yeah. So, wait, are you there? Oh, okay. We're in a break.
Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. We are in the middle of the provocative progressive political panel. Our guest on the panel today are our own executive producer and liberal activist, Mark Grimaldi, and Tara Devlin, the host of TARABUSTER, as you can see by the sign, if you're watching us,
and the
sign and the coffee cup. You're going to have to send me a coffee cup.
Yes, I will. Most definitely.
Anyway, we've been talking about the bitter divisions that plague American society. Mark, do you want to continue? We cut you off to get to the break. Actually, you
That's
cut
okay.
you off to get to
As
the
a
break.
producer, I learned to cut myself off. So, I think that the more you learn about how we've got to this point, I think that helps you understand where we're going to go unless something changes. And you can see it happening with what Tara referred to. I never thought I would live through an insurrection. That's just, if you were growing up and learning in high school and college about government, those sounds like things of, the past, that something like an armed rebellion could happen. You never thought that with the technology and the sophistication of our society that we would experience something like that, yet we did. And now, not only are Republicans, many Republicans, trying to rewrite history and call it things like a tourist visit, but also you have companies that just came out like today, like Toyota, which Axios has a report I encourage people to look at. Have donated more than twice as much than any other company to Republicans who refused to certify the election. And that's after saying that they would refuse to support those people. And when asked about it, they released a statement saying, well, we don't think one vote should define, whether or not we support someone. So I encourage people, put your money where your mouth is. My wife owns a Toyota, and we're going to be looking for a new car. Right. And I can assure you there is no way in hell we will be buying a Toyota because, you know what? That is where we have to exercise our power how we are able to. And now, before things come to a head and get worse, this is the time to do it. Because, you have to lay things out in very plain terms and explain where we're at. Because if you don't, then, the Department of Homeland Security is already talking today about how they're concerned about this right-wing chatter of people who believe that Trump is going to be reinstated in August. And how are they going to react when that doesn't happen? That brings it to the question of how do you go on the same plane with these people who are living a different reality? I guess that's something we've never really experienced before because of the polarization of our media. So it's a very different situation that we're in than I think we've ever been in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to go back to break, a short break, so we can bring back our radio listeners, and we will have more of Deadline DC and more of the provocative progressive political panel with the host of TARABUSTER, Tara Devlin, and our own executive producer, Mark Grimaldi. So don't go anywhere. We'll be back very quickly.
Yes.
Stay healthy.
Welcome back to Deadline DC. Brad, we, as we usually do in the second half hour, are holding court on the provocative progressive political panel. Our guests on the panel today are Tara Devlin, the host of TARABUSTER, and our own executive producer and liberal activist, Mark Grimaldi. Tara, Sunday will be the 4th of July. So we're going to be talking a lot about patriotism.
Yes.
It seems to me, to use an example, that taking over, they tried to clothe the takeover of the Capitol in the American flag. But it strikes me that an insurrection like that, where you're essentially occupying the seat of popular democracy, is not very patriotic.
To say the least.
And have conservatives lost the claim they used to have on flag waving and patriotism?
Yes. I'll take this one. Yes. They, in fact, one of the things that I'm doing, this is one of my missions in life, besides being an advocate for universal health care, but that's all related with patriotism, because liberals are the real patriots. This is why Republicans have to claim the mantle of patriotism and put on the accoutrement of stars and flags and tricornered hats and all kinds of external symbols of patriotism, because the substance of patriotism is really over their heads. To be a patriot, it basically means fellow countrymen, and that's the root of the word. Regardless, the meaning of the word is leaving no one behind. We're in this together. The motto of the country is e pluribus unum, out of many one. What part of patriotism is everything that we see? That, I mean, the only way. I mean, what is patriotism? It's sort of like their fake Christianity. They boil their supposed love of Jesus down to being a gay basher. That's basically it. And with patriotism, it's the search for the superior moral justification for selfishness. That's not being a patriot. I mean, we're in this together. That's why we form communities and countries, so we can have the freedom that they claim to be all about. But they're not patriots at all, because being a patriot, I mean, the United States is a patriotic, is a progressive experiment. Right? There's nothing more progressive than overthrowing a king and an aristocracy and pledging your life, fortune, and sacred honor to each other. It's everything in that sentence, everything in the Declaration of Independence is not conservative in any sense of the word. So we have to reclaim patriotism, because the founders, for all their hypocrisy, they were students of the liberal age of enlightenment. And we're still trying to bring that to fruition. And the closer we get to that, that's when they freak out. That's when they storm the Capitol and they turn to violence, because the rules of democracy are too hard for them. You see, they don't want to knock on doors and build coalitions. They want to rig the game. They want dirty tricks. If they were really patriots, I mean, we're really under the tyranny of a minority party, because they receive fewer votes, they represent a minority of people, and then they rig the game whenever they get in power. And it's never about e pluribus unum. It's about divide and conquer. So I don't know, as somebody who studies history a little bit, I see the writing on the wall if they are not really put in their place. I mean, legally and peacefully. But we have to reclaim patriotism and fight for this democracy like it's on life support, because it is. It really is. So I don't know. Yeah.
Mark, celebrating the 4th of July on Sunday, how do you think, what values, when you think about the 4th of July and Independence Day, what values are uniquely American that we should be celebrating?
I think it's got to be, for me, is the right to vote, the right to determine the direction of your country. And, not to beat a dead horse, but again, that was something that was, paired with the For the People Act, was the John Lewis Voting Rights Act.
I think we can stand to beat that horse a lot more, because it was a tragedy that it did not pass. I mean, it would make fundamental reforms to the political process that are very necessary and vital.
And a massive majority of Democrats and Republican voters actually agree to the provisions in the bill and are for them. Right. Just to give you an example, one thing that's very common sense to me is, instead of having to go ask a corporation for huge sums of money, you can, if you get a small donation of, let's say I donate $50 to candidate A, well, they would then get a 6 times match from a fund that was already pre-funded, instead of going to the corporate donors. So it encourages you to support and pursue policies that are good for people regardless of their wealth. Yeah. And just think about how that would transform a politician. And Brad, you're in this world. Congressmen and congresswomen and senators talk about how much they hate dialing for dollars, and they have to spend an absurd amount of money, a certain amount of time doing that. And if they didn't have to do that, if they could go out and just have more town hall meetings and think about how simply pursuing the needs of your constituents instead of pursuing the money you need to beat your opponent would change things. I mean, it would radically change the system, and that's just one part of it. The Voting Rights Act, it made me think of something that Tara brought up about how when you see someone who drapes themselves in the flag or someone who claims to be Christian but goes against things in the Bible, there's something that this Georgia SB 202 bill, the Georgia voter restriction bill that passed, made me think of. There's the passage in the Bible. I had to look it up. Matthew 25. It says, "For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink." Well, there's a provision in that law that you can't even hand out water to people who are waiting hours in line to vote, which happens regularly, which happened in the presidential election in Georgia and which happened in the Senate elections in Georgia and the special Senate elections. So it just, I mean, you can't look for any clearer examples of how those are anti-freedom and anti-Christianity, both things which conservatives claim to have as, what defines them.
Yes.
So it's hypocrisy at its finest, and, we not only need to shine a light on it, but we need to push with a fierce urgency, just like when we were fighting to save this country from Donald Trump. And my God, thank God we did, because if you keep hearing about all the things that were trying to be done behind the scenes, like declare the Insurrection Act, fire on protesters, things are just coming up in the last 2 weeks that we're finding out from interviews from senior administration officials. That's what we're up against, because right now, that's what it looks like is gonna, unless he's in prison, that's who it looks like they want to put back up to run in 2024.
That's right.
And imagine
how much. I should mention that last week the Justice Department under Judge Merrick Garland filed suit against the state of Georgia, saying that its new election laws were racially discriminatory. So we'll have to follow that. Tara, you want to have the final word before we break?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things we could talk about. It's just, this is a crucial time, and we have to take the lessons of history. So just look at what happened with the rise of Nazi Germany. Hitler was same thing. He initially tried to overthrow the government by violent means, came back 10 years later, was elected chancellor. So just because they have been defeated right now, obviously this coup is continuing, and we really need to heed those warnings. And as far as the corporations love fascism, so it doesn't surprise me that Toyota is now donating to Congress people again. It's
I knew when they instituted that ban it wasn't going to last long.
Right.
And let me close by saying this. You can't solve any of the fundamental problems in this country without getting big money out of politics.
That's it.
You can rearrange the furniture all you want, but as long as money dominates American politics, from corporations and wealthy individuals who are finding ways of spending millions of dollars on campaigns every year, nothing else is going to work. That's it for Deadline DC today. I want to thank our guest, Shawn Zella, the editor of Congressional Quarterly Magazine, Tara Devlin, the host of TARABUSTER, and our own executive producer and political activist, Mark Grimaldi. Stay tuned, enjoy your 4th of July, and remember, liberals are patriotic.
That's right.
Amen.